most boards are willing to pay for performance and pay significant amounts for performance. And so creating any structure where, either ownership or compensation increases when you have significant milestones of performance is a much easier negotiation and conversation, I think, to have for most CEO founders and most boards. So any of those structures, I think, is favorable for alignment of incentives. Everyone's focused on the biggest outcome possible. They take out any of the kind of odd, discussions around paying for, potential or maybe over, the sort of like existing versus a hired gun CEO. It takes those issues off the table. And I think if you're in the seat of the founder CEO and you're confident in your business, the actual economic outcomes will be far greater, which is exactly why Elons of the world are choosing that package. Because when you do outperform, you'll just never be able to negotiate any other package that aggressive unless it was tied to some outperformance.
Yep.
So I truly think it is a win-win-win. I just, the sort of devil's advocate is like, well, I don't even know it's devil's advocate, but there's going to be some conversations when some of these performance packages kick in where people are astounded by the amount of economics that.
Well, certainly there has been in the Tesla use case, right? Where people were at the time, maybe people were, oh, that's never going to happen because there was such a high valuation to get the hurdle to kick in. But then I think when it kicked in, I think there were people who were concerned, which makes sense. I mean, we're talking about a high class problem in general, so we should take a step back. Like, it's not like these founders are people who are generally taking advantage of. A lot of these founders are multimillionaires, sometimes even richer than that. So this is a very, very high class problem that we're trying, and we're really trying to address things really around like the margins on this.
Yeah, I mean, one comment I make though is that it is a high class problem when it works.
Yeah, that's right.
And everyone likes to talk about the cases when it works, but on a percentage basis, I would make the argument the majority of founder CEO comp issues are not in cases where the company works, right? Yep. I mean, the majority of startups fail. The majority of founder CEOs are in companies that fail. And so the most like punitive, bad outcomes occur when startups fail. And sort of like, that's why in general, people gloss over this as a problem because they point to the success outcomes and say, those people are well compensated or overcompensated. We shouldn't even talk about this. But actually, I'm more concerned about the other cases, right? The people who really need to be focused on this issue, of course, you don't know it when you're in it, but are the people who are not going to have the great outcome.
Yeah.
And that's where it's the most, painful.
And there is kind of a scenario where there's like, okay, there's the start where they completely fails, like a 0x kind of return or something like that. A lot of startups are, I'd say, in the like 2x return. Kind of. So it didn't fail. It was actually it made some money for the investors. It had, but even there, you could see a lot of like the founder may come out of it unaligned or they may felt like they worked too hard for it, or they may have had to done like certain sacrifices or other types of things as well.
Yeah, I mean, and those situations, I think, are the ones where, I mean, you could make the simple math, which is, was the majority of your compensation as a founder CEO your salary or your equity?
Yeah, it's almost always the equity. Yeah.
On the success outcomes, but I would guess on the sub 2x outcomes, there's more of a blend.
Yep.
And there's going to be some tipping point where salary became much more significant. And I would argue in almost 100% of those situations that the salary comp decision made for the CEO is something that the individual wishes they could have revisited or done differently. And those are the ones that are on a percentage basis, probably the greatest.
Yeah, that's right. And a non-founder CEO that got hired into the job would have had a market rate for that competition. Interesting. Right. This has been super interesting. Are there any other things that you think like that people aren't addressing on things like compensation?
I mean, I like, one of my like mantras these days is just about mental health of, people in very, very high stress, jobs in general. And I know multiple people that were sort of unable to do their job at their full potential because they had compensation related challenges in their household. And the general situation is there's an individual who starts a company who I think frankly does everything right. They align their compensation with the greater good of the company, so they underpay themselves. And instead of the company taking 2 years like they thought, maybe they're 7 or 8 years in, and they've never really addressed their personal situation, and it feels to them like they're always a quarter or it's 6 months or a year from something great happening for the company. And they basically create this scenario where they've undercompensated for themselves for a long time, and it starts to add significant stress to their lives and their family. And maybe they start having kids and other things start happening. And those situations, to me, that seemed like a 6 month to 1 year problem that ended up being like a 5 to 10 year problem and are unaddressed, are actually the situations I think are most critical for these conversations to sort of be surfaced and to be had. And unfortunately, I think it is that individual's sort of role and responsibility to bring it up, because I do not believe other people will bring it up. It's not going to come from the board, because these individuals are generally superstars at hiding the fact that they're under massive stress.
Yep.
And so I don't know how to address that beyond saying that I believe there is a sort of borderline crisis happening in the non-success cases that is unaddressed in Silicon Valley.